Chapter 1.13 In Dreams. No, Twitch, like this. A familiar but distant voice echoed softly through the darkness, the image of the training dummies outside the academy stables emerging into her view. It was evening, and the lightning bugs were dancing over the row of hedges beyond the far fence. They scattered, but only briefly, as a chain of purple magic quickly wrapped around the straw-stuffed body of one of the dummies. See? It's in the wrist. Twitch let out a grunt of frustration as her own chain barely slapped the side of the dummy she was trying to bind, before falling to the ground, disappearing in a puff of smoke. I'm never going to get this, Eric, she sighed, shaking her head and letting her shoulders slump in defeat. A chuckle echoed in her ears as she turned her gaze down, ashamed. Not with that attitude, you won't, he said with a smirk, letting his own chain vanish as he stood up taller, turning toward her. He was looking at her with golden eyes of admiration, while she was busy looking at the ground. Just keep trying, he urged. If I can't figure all this out, she sulked, then I'm going to get expelled. She took a deep breath, fighting back the tears forming in her eyes. She quickly turned away, getting angry at herself for letting Eric see her so weak, so vulnerable. Look, Eric started reassuringly, reaching out to place his paw on her shoulder. Binding magic is really It's not just the binding magic, Eric, she interrupted him, pulling away. It's all the combat magics. Lightning, fire, all of it. She continued loudly, her tears finally forcing their way out. I don't belong here. The dam had broken and the tears came easily as she buried her face into her sleeves of her purple robe, sobbing. Twitch, Eric said softly, wrapping his arms around her, placing his furry chin on top of her head. You can do this. Deep down, she knew he was trying to be encouraging, but at hearing those words, she felt dismissed, and already being angry at herself for breaking down, her sorrow immediately ignited into anger. Get off, she grunted, as she elbowed him away from her, and in the same movement, summoned her binding chain in her claws. She flung it forcefully at the dummy again, and this time, it wrapped cleanly around the middle 3 times before cinching tightly closed. She didn't have time to celebrate her accomplishment before her anger got the better of her, and the chain cinched tighter, slicing the dummy cleanly in two. Her heart raced with adrenaline, and she struggled to catch her breath, her chain vanishing as the rage faded from her eyes. Eric looked on in stunned but pleased disbelief at the spectacle. He waited a moment to see if she was done with her tantrum before he would risk breaking the silence of the now quiet evening air. See? He said, pausing again. But, he continued. Of course there's a but, she thought to herself as she glared at him sideways, waiting for him to finish saying what he had so bravely begun to say. Remember, the stronger the emotion, he said, and again he paused, this time waiting for her to finish the statement. I know, she said acceptingly, having felt a cathartic release of the frustration that had built up in her. The stronger the magic. Eric's face, along with the stables and training dummies behind him, began to swirl and Twitch's head spun as she struggled to open her eyes. Her moan grew louder as the pain in her shoulder seared and burned, her head throbbing, the stone walls of the Academy's medical wing coming into focus around her. She struggled to move, but her joints and bones felt frozen, locked in place, unwilling to bend as she tried to lift her head. Not yet, dear, a soft voice said as an academy medical nurse came into view above her, gently placing her paw on her forehead. Back in you go, she whispered through the rag tied around her face like a mask. The image of the nurse quickly flashed and faded away as she slipped back into her coma. That's the 8th one, Twitch, Eric's voice echoed in her ears again, as the light from the fireflies pierced the darkness. Eric threw the bottom half of the dummy he had just pulled off the support post into a pile of other dummy halves. Picking up a new one, he let out a heavy grunt as he jammed it down onto the post. I know, Eric. Twitch was frustrated, which only made it harder for her to control her magic. I'm sorry, I'm trying. She turned away and started pacing, trying to control her breathing and calm her anger. Are you, though? Eric asked, with a sarcastic attitude that Twitch had come to find so annoyingly adorable. I'm sure the stable hands love making these for us, but... He drew out the word as he motioned to the pile of partial dummies. They also have better things to do. Twitch readied herself to cast again, letting out a yell as she whipped the chain forward, and again, straw and bits of fabric went flying through the air. "Damn it!" she exclaimed as her chain vanished into the evening air. "I can't do this." "That's what you said the other day," Eric started, as he begrudgingly replaced the dummy again, "when you couldn't even get them bound." He inhaled deeply. "You just don't care enough, that's all." "What?" she exclaimed, stopping her pacing and casting him a sideways glance. "I don't care enough?" Tried too much," she said sarcastically as she pointed to the pile of dummies. She returned to her pacing, wringing her paws together anxiously. "Oh, you're angry enough, all right. There's no question there," Eric conceded. "But," he started, as Twitch stopped pacing at the sound of that overly emphasized word. "To you," he continued, "these dummies are just straw and fabric." He motioned at the circle of loose straw, fabric scraps, and dummy parts lying around the training range. "They don't mean anything to you." As he finished, he positioned himself directly in front of the dummy, between it and Twitch. "All right, come on," Twitch waved impatiently, waiting for him to move so she could cast again. He instead raised an eyebrow as he waited patiently for her to take the hint. "Move, Eric, I don't want to hit you." "Hit me," he insisted. "Don't be stupid, Eric," she exclaimed. "You've seen what happens. I'll hurt you." "No, you won't. Do it." He held fast. Twitch could feel the irritation rising in her, but was still too unsure about trying the spell on the living target. She kept shaking her head as she continued to pace, doing her best to stay resolute. "Do it, Twitch," he continued, trying to provoke her. Each time he could see her getting more visibly irritated, trying to stay calm. "Just do it already." "Fine!" she yelled as she quickly turned, summoning the chain and flinging it at him. It wrapped around him 3 times, pinning his arms down, and he immediately strained against the burning of the chain. "Good," he grunted through clenched teeth. "Now, control it." His face continued to contort in pain as the anger seared into him from every direction around him. The chains tightened as Eric turned his face up to the night sky, letting out a guttural, painful cry. Twitch could feel the searing anger being drawn out of her, and as the vision of Eric struggling began to swirl, the sound of Eric's scream melted into her own. She awoke from her coma with her shoulder burning, but still unable to move. "We're almost done, dear," the nurse said, again touching Twitch's forehead with her paw. "Stop fighting." The medical wing and the nurse quickly faded from view, and again Twitch found herself at the training range outside the stables, the lightning bugs dancing their evening ballad above the hedges. "I'm healing fine, Twitch," Eric's voice echoed in her ears as she turned to find him standing next to her. He turned towards her and gently grabbed both her shoulders. "But the Hierophant isn't happy. The board is reviewing the incident," he said with an eye roll, releasing her shoulders to make finger quote marks in the air, a practice he had seen humans do when they playfully called something a thing that it's not. Another proclivity that Twitch despised about the humans. More deception. "What do you think they'll do?" she asked with a defeated tone, lowering her eyes in shame again, unable to look at him. He reached up a paw and, grabbing the brim of her purple hat, gently removed it and tossed it atop a nearby hay bale. "I don't know," he confessed, reaching down and taking both of her paws in his. "Let's not worry about that right now." She looked up at him, taking notice of a glint in his eyes that she had not previously been drawn to. "Then what should we worry about?" Her heart began to race as she tried focusing on the feeling of his paws moving over hers. "The part that you haven't learned yet," he said cryptically, looking down. He held both of her paws together with his one, while with the other he delicately drew forth the same purple binding chain. She wanted to pull away, but she trusted him not to hurt her, the same way he erroneously trusted her a few days prior. The chain wrapped around her wrists, and she flinched, expecting to feel pain. But where there should have been a searing burn, she experienced a soft warmth, the chain still firm and tightly bound, but not painful. "I don't understand," she said, confused. "It doesn't hurt." "Anger is a great emotion when a life is in danger," he said, looking into her eyes. But anger isn't the only emotion that can fuel magic, and binding doesn't have to hurt. Still holding the chain, he pulled her hands up above her head, the movement surprising her. A much more pleasant surprise came when Eric leaned in for a kiss.